There's a feature on Superstrobes or S360 beacons from Whelen that was a later feature, and it's the synchronization feature. Essentially, you don't need to use a remote power supply like pictured here. You can just run power to your beacons and then run a sync wire between them. It works with up to two beacons alternating, more if you're okay with simultaneous. So that could be an advantage if you didn't want to deal with the added wires like you'd see here. That would be involved in a remote power supply, which up until that came out, that was the option. So I dug out the kit that had come with the strobes, and it didn't look like that big a deal, and it wasn't. You just kind of had to put together one sync wire between them. So I completed that, and lo and behold, they synchronize. They synchronize in Comet Flash. So I thought I would compare that to the Comet Flash of remote models. I have one older remote model from the 80s and one newer from around the same time as the synchronized ones. And what I noticed when I took a look at them is, while the remote ones are going to flash in any way you hook them up to whatever power supply you hook them to, the synchronization wire version has a very fast cadence, or there's really no pause between the comet flashes. Whereas on a remote power supply, and in this case I chose an earlier Comet Flash power supply to kind of split the difference between the beacon on the right and the beacon on the left, even though they are very similar throughout the years. There's still that kind of pause in between the flashes, which is, I think, nice. It gives a little bit of off time. When you string them together in the synchronization mode, you really are flashing back to back. There's not a whole lot of off time between the two beacons. Their Comet Flash flashes are basically one right after another, but they are in fact synchronized. So I started digging through my other Superstrobe or S360 lights to see what sort of different options I had, and I really had mostly newer ones. I have previously pictured a video of my halogen strobe combo that flashes a incandescent or halogen bulb in synchronization with the strobe. I have that. That's an unusual model, but pretty much I had your run-of-the-mill models throughout the years. And the one on the left being a much earlier one. Setup, or the output, seems to be very similar to me, but the design changed quite a bit. You notice the blackout on top of the older one. On the newer one, it's accomplished by an internal lid, if you will. The internal optics haven't changed a lot, and they really were stolen from the Commander and 8000 series strobe bars anyway. But you see on the left there, the older remote beacon is really pretty much just a socket for the same sort of bulb that was used in the Commander strobes, and there's a Commander strobe optic later style next to it. The earlier Commander strobe optics went flying saucer, as they call it on the right, and then it was a lidded style. But the later Commander and 8000 strobe models used the same internal optic that you're seeing in both models of Superstrobes there. And it really didn't change much at all. Now, as far as the name Superstrobe is concerned, the Commander, which is most like it, is the domes actually say Commander. But interestingly enough, the 8000 series strobe bars were called Superstrobe bars. And on their domes, if they don't have top blackouts, you can read Superstrobe series. And that was a name that they actually used for the 8000 series light bar. So I thought we'd compare my older Superstrobe 360 to a last generation Commander or 5200 series strobe. I'm using a double flash power supply for the remote Superstrobe that was released right around the same time as the 5200 or the commander sized beacon on the right. So they're really being powered by very similar power supplies with very similar internal optics. The difference you're looking at here is going to be the diameter of the overall light and the narrowness of the fluting in the optics. It's almost like they just shrunk the strobe commander down, or the 5200 down, to make the Superstrobe. I kind of wish I would have shot some separate footage of the lights because the flashes reflecting off each other kind of make it hard to tell which light is flashing when. However, the flashes to me in person seemed very, very similar in brightness. The rate's similar, which again is based on the power supply you power it with. We saw this same remote older 360 flashing much, much faster on a newer power supply. But if you power them with the power supply that was around when the light debuted, and you have the internal power supply on the 5200 or the Commander, they look very, very similar. The light output, I can't really tell a whole heck of a lot of a difference. Both lamps both strobes were actually available with cruise lights if you wanted them. Neither one of these has a cruise light, and I chose to do that this way because I don't have any Superstrobes that have cruise lights, and a lot of my 5200s do, but I wanted it to be equal comparison. I think when you put a strobe light in a 360 or a Superstrobe, it actually looks worse than in the Commander. The cruise light seems to spread out more in the larger dome, whereas in the smaller dome it's kind of crowded, I think. I don't have a good example to show, though. Aside from that, I think they essentially shrunk the Commander down and made a new product, which I'm not disparaging that. That was a good idea. The Commander was oversized for the market at the time that it was discontinued. So shrinking it down to make a equally visible but more modern sized beacon was absolutely a decision that I don't see any reason why they wouldn't have made. So all things being equal, the Superstrobe or 360 or S360 or the models as they go throughout the years, the internals changed a little bit. They retained their spreader optic that they stole or borrowed from the 8000 bar and the Commander 5200, but other than that, and the bulb becoming a reflector bulb combo, they stayed pretty similar from their debut in the mid 80s until their discontinuation around 2010. They were offered in models with internal power supplies and in models that were remote throughout their whole offering. The power supplies which powered them externally and the power supplies which powered them internally obviously changed throughout that time period quite a bit. But again, the beacon itself really didn't change significantly aside from the updates to the bulb, and the top blackout became a blackout with conical mirror. Other than that, it remained pretty much the same and was pretty similar to a shrunken version of the Commander or 5200 or that series of light, which they were actually offered alongside each other for a while. The 360 debuted and the Commander was still offered for a few years. But you can see just how similar it looks from the top down. Very, very similar, just no top blackout. When you take it apart, here's the internal of the original 360. It's pretty much the same. But they were really, really, really going to make sure that you knew that the Superstrobe was a new product. The literature that came out with it was extremely hyped. Um, they were very much into letting you know that it's a whole new family of beacon, not just a new face. Um, was it? Not really, but it was a completely different size, a different footprint. It was a modernized version of the Commander Light. I think it was oversold as being something brand new, but that's what companies do, is they oversell their new product. So offered alongside of the 5200, you can really see just how similar they were. And they continued to be offered alongside one another up until the Commander was discontinued right around 1990. The Superstrobe was sold on crossbars. They made additions, integrated branch guards, things that you didn't get with the Commander, but you did get a raised skirt in case you were used to that. So powering my early version of the beacon and my more recent version of the beacon, both remote versions, powering them from a Strobe power supply that was out right around the time where the changeover occurred between the two styles, I thought would be interesting. This power supply probably is a little bit newer than the remote head with the black top on the right now, but it would have been sold around the time of the one on the left. Again, what's interesting to me is I don't think the light output in the design changes is that much different. It's possible that outside in the sun you might notice a big difference. The newer model having a reflective cone at the bottom and top instead of just a blackout shield might make a bigger difference in the field. And these lights certainly were popular and were used on everything from DOT vehicles to the rear of fire vehicles. You even saw them on the corner tops of some ambulances, not commonly, but you did see it. So these were popular lights, and I think Whelen did a nice job of transitioning their popular 5200 into a size and package that would have some staying power, and it did last all the way up till what I would call the near end of strobes in 2010. So the change they made was certainly well received, and it became an iconic product. What was powering the light was a lot of the light, in my opinion, which is why I kind of did this power supply swap out. But even what was in the light as an internal power supply was a lot of what the light was, in my opinion. When they started to update the light in the mid 90s, around the time the Commander was discontinued, they began offering this polished cone, integral bulb design that was available with a lot more options. You had a built-in photo cell if you wanted for high-low power. The remote version got the update too. The light was pretty simple though. When it had a power supply inside, it was Comet Flash on or off initially. But Comet Flash was a big update for it as a product. Being that it was on or off, and Comet Flash being new, it was pretty exciting, if you will. Then slightly later, they offered multiple patterns with a selection switch. Still selling that whole internal reflector design, which had served them pretty well. And then it became part of the snow, sun, fog, simultaneous flash series, where you have a synchronized incandescent or halogen flash with the strobe. So it did continue in that line. However, it was a little simpler then to change flash patterns. In this case, you had to remove something. Whereas later, you got the option just to connect different wires and get a different flash pattern. Get a little bit more complicated, but all the options remained the same. And then enter the option that I was playing with, the synchronizer, in right around 2000, a little earlier. And it made it a pretty versatile light, even up until when it ended up being discontinued. They were offering quite a few options, which some of them kind of dropped away, like the simultaneous flash option. But I think putting these newer version in sync mode next to the very old version and the newer version remotes and powering them in the same flash pattern is an interesting comparison. The newer strobe power supply still has a bigger lag between the flashes than the beacons when they're in synchronization mode, but it's less of a lag than the early Comet flash. This particular power supply also grants you the option to run a double speed Comet flash, which outpaces the synchronized beacons, but still has a dark time in between them, whereas the synchronized Superstrobe beacons still kind of just pop right on top of each other as far as when you synchronize them. So I shot quite a bit of footage, different speeds and angles, comparing the different speeds of Comet Flash and the remote beacons and the synchronized beacons, showing them together, apart, etc. There's quite a bit of footage of that. So if you'd like to continue on scrolling through that or watching it through, it does kind of show the unique abilities of the Superstrobe to take on whatever power supply was available at the time. And it really kind of carried the idea of the internal optics strobe forward, which was something that they started with the original 5000 Commander and into the 5200, and then pushed over into the Superstrobe. And like I said, it stuck around through many power supplies, features, options, and didn't really go away until strobes in general went away. So an iconic Whelen product to be sure. And there's a significant amount of footage here that probably could have been edited off as far as anything for me to discuss about it. But it's here if you want to view it. So I'd like to thank you for watching, and please like and subscribe if you enjoy this type of content. And stick around and watch the rest of the show if you so choose. Thanks.